The hangar lights flickered on at 4:47 in the morning when the CEO's phone buzzed with a message that made her drop her coffee cup on the concrete floor. All 22 grounded aircraft, the ones that had been rusting on the tarmac for 11 months after the merger collapsed, were suddenly cleared for flight. Every single one. Overnight. And nobody could explain how. Margaret Holt had built Sterling Air from 3 leased planes into a regional carrier with 22 jets, 400 employees, and a reputation for precision that made competitors nervous. But precision had a price. When the merger with a larger airline fell through last year, she'd been forced to slash the maintenance budget, and 22 planes sat idle because there simply wasn't enough staff or money to certify them airworthy again. Insurance wouldn't touch them. Regulators wouldn't clear them. The planes had become 22 monuments to failure, and Margaret walked past them every day like walking past gravestones. If you believe in second chances, in the quiet kind of hope that shows up when we least expect it, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little faith today, and subscribe to Hope and Wisdom so you never miss a story like this one. Now back to the hangar, where Margaret stood in the grey dawn light staring at inspection tags she hadn't signed, hydraulic systems that had been rebuilt, and engines that hummed like they'd never sat idle a day in their lives. She grabbed the first mechanic she saw, a young woman named Priya Chandrasekaran who was still wiping grease from her hands, and demanded to know who had done this. Priya's eyes darted toward the far end of the hangar, toward a man kneeling beside plane 19 with a torque wrench in his hand, checking a panel that had already been checked twice. His name was Walter Abayoy, and 6 weeks earlier, Margaret herself had signed his termination papers. He'd been a senior mechanic at Sterling Air for 9 years, the kind of quiet, methodical worker who never asked for recognition, but when the budget cuts came, seniority hadn't mattered as much as salary numbers on a spreadsheet, and Walter's name had been near the top of that spreadsheet because he'd been there long enough to earn real pay. He was also a single father raising 2 children after his wife passed away 3 years earlier, and Margaret remembered, with a sting of guilt she'd buried at the time, that he'd asked her that day if there was any other way. She'd told him there wasn't. She'd told herself the company came first. Margaret crossed the hangar floor with her heels clicking against concrete that still smelled of jet fuel and rain, and when Walter looked up at her, there was no anger in his face, only a tiredness that came from something deeper than lost sleep. She asked him, quietly, why he was there. Why he'd spent 6 weeks of unpaid nights fixing planes that weren't his responsibility anymore, for a company that had let him go without so much as a proper goodbye. Walter set down his wrench and told her the truth. He said that after he lost his job, he sat in his kitchen for 3 days doing nothing, watching his daughter do her homework at the same table where his wife used to help her, and he realized that sitting still was going to break him faster than any layoff could. So he started coming back at night, after his kids were asleep and a neighbor could watch them, climbing the hangar fence with a badge that technically should have been deactivated but somehow never was. He said he didn't do it for a paycheck or for his job back. He did it because those 22 planes represented 400 families' salaries, and because somewhere in this industry, someone had taught him that you take care of the machines because the machines carry people home to the ones who love them. He said his late wife used to tell him that purpose doesn't clock out just because circumstances change, and he decided to believe her one more time. Margaret stood there in silence long enough that the hangar workers around them stopped pretending not to listen. She thought about the spreadsheet that had cost this man his income, and she thought about the 22 tags signed in his careful handwriting, each one a small act of loyalty to a company that had shown him none in return. She thought about her own father, a machinist who'd raised her alone after her mother left, and how he used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when someone's watching, it's what they do when nobody's there to see it and nothing's owed to them at all. She didn't give a speech. She simply extended her hand, and when Walter shook it, she told him his job was waiting for him that morning, along with 6 weeks of back pay for work he'd never billed her for, and a promotion to lead mechanic because Sterling Air needed people who understood what those planes were really carrying. Word spread through the hangar within minutes, and by the time the sun cleared the runway lights, mechanics who'd worked alongside Walter for years were shaking his hand, some of them wiping their eyes with the backs of oil-stained gloves, because they'd known this man's character long before their CEO had bothered to ask. If this story moved something in you today, if it reminded you that kindness quietly given always finds its way back, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, because it truly means the world to see this community grow. And before we close this chapter, if you've made it this far, type, "I believe in second chances," in the comments, because those words matter more than you know to someone who might be scrolling past tonight feeling forgotten. 6 months later, all 22 planes were back in the sky, and Walter Abayoy stood on the tarmac most mornings watching them lift off, knowing that somewhere above the clouds, his quiet nights of unpaid devotion were carrying strangers safely home to the people who loved them, just as he always believed they would.